Larry, you've been critical in the past of the president's recent trade posturing. Is there any benefit, economic or national security related, to the U.S. in what the president is doing right now?
I think the devil's all in the details. If the president is successful in strengthening the regime when we look at foreign investments and he prevents some economic espionage from taking place, that'll be a good thing. If he's successful in causing China to take a more welcoming approach to U.S. companies, that will be a good thing. I think the question is always in these things, what's actually really going to happen? And so far, the rhetoric from the president has run way ahead of the reality, and that's why I've got a fairly high level of anxiety at this point about how this is all going to play out.
Do you have any sense of what our international trade policy will look like in 6 months or a year's time? And indeed, what other countries' international trade policy will look like, you know, trying to get a sort of a jump on the U.S., as we saw with Canada already becoming more protectionist?
Right now it looks like the general direction is going to be towards more protection, more restriction, less trade, more inability of U.S. producers to produce, which will mean less willingness of U.S. producers to hire and will hurt the very workers President Trump is most focused on. So right now, this looks pretty awful. Why would we be, in the name of national security, putting tariffs on Canadian steel that raise the price of steel for everybody who produces automobiles or everybody who's producing bridges over rivers or strengthening the country's infrastructure? Why would we want to tax all of that in order to put a burden on Canada? And what that's got to do with our national security is kind of inconceivable. So I have to say it doesn't look like a very good picture. But one thing we know with this president is things change quickly, and perhaps it'll get to a better place at some point.
So far, the economic costs have been pretty limited, some warnings perhaps from companies. Do you see any concrete impact on the economy yet?
I think it's too early. I think you do see some signs of increased uncertainty leading to delay in investment plans, and I don't think that it's a trivial thing that when we deliver our threats, the market moves down by hundreds of points, which represents the destruction of hundreds of billions of dollars of wealth, at least on a temporary basis.
Back in 2015, Professor Summers, you wrote that stronger unions are not just good for their members, they are good for our country and our descendants. Your reaction to today's Supreme Court decision?
I haven't had a chance to study it, but on the early going, I'd have to say I'm quite disappointed by it. It doesn't seem to me to be the kind of thing we're trying or should be trying to accomplish. Very much the opposite.
I also want to ask you your view of what some are calling the experiment that the Fed is now running, so allowing unemployment to run far below what had been a typical benchmark estimate of full employment and a slight inflation overshoot. What do you say to this policy?
I think that the dangers are still much more on the side of too much slowdown than they are of too much inflation. We still haven't really solidly hit a 2% inflation target. So I'm not seriously concerned about the Fed pursuing too easy a policy. If anything, I think the dangers are that the Fed will pursue too tight a policy.
Professor Summers, you said then that you're expecting how many interest rate increases this year?
I'm not sure what the number will be. I think it's pretty clear that, perhaps two. but I don't know. I don't have a confident number. I think the broader question is, what's the strategy? And is the strategy one of relying on the Phillips curve and trying to preempt inflation, or is the strategy one of trying to let the economy grow as much as possible and respond to inflation problems as they arise? And given our history of falling way below inflation targets for 9 years now, I would very much favor the second strategy.
Professor Summers, I'm wondering what the conversation in Aspen, Colorado is at the moment about the midterms. We just saw a pretty huge upset in New York yesterday with Congressman Joe Crowley out to a pretty left-leaning challenger, the first in 14 years. Where does the Democratic Party have to move to in order to revitalize a base?
I don't think the question's very well phrased in terms of left versus right. I think what we need is candidates with ideas that are creating a universal prosperity, one that all Americans can share in. I think the days of trickle down as an approach to economic strategy are over, but I think one can avoid trickle down policies and at the same time take an approach that recognizes that we all gain from having a strong economy and not trying to pit one part of the economy against other parts of the economy.